Parshas Chayei, but it speaks about the Briis Milah, and it's actually a pasuk that we say by a Briis Milah. So therefore, it's very appropriate to learn it on this week's parsha, where we speak about Avraham Avinu getting the mitzvah of Briis Milah. Siyata d'Shmaya early in Vav Erev Shabbos Kodesh Parshas Chayei Chavav Mar Cheshvan Tavshin Tezayin. This was a Maamar said in 1955. This was actually because of a Vachnacht. The Rebbe was a Vachnacht. It was a night before the Briis. A family was very close to the Rebbe. So it says in the pasuk, Ashrei Tivchar. It says a pasuk in Tillim. Fortunate is you that choose v'tikrav, and you bring close yishkan chatzerecha, that he dwells in your courtyards, nisba b'tuv beisecha, and he's satisfied in the goodness of your house, kedosh eichalecha, in the holiness of your palace, sanctuary, room, etc. So this is talking about, simply put, that the Yidden are brought close and they reside in the courtyards of Hashem. This is a pasuk that we recite before the Briis Milah, like it's brought down the Siddur, where it says the order of the Briis Milah. This is a pasuk that's brought down over there to say. Now, where does this come from? So he says to say this before Briis Milah. The source for this is what it says in the Zohar. Chasidai kadmoi, the early pious ones, the early Chasidim, kadmakrivim banayu lekarbana, when they offer up and they bring close their children or their sons as a korban. So, in other words, the Briis Milah is considered like we're offering our child as a korban to Hashem, or bringing our child close to Hashem. The Paschi v'Amri, they open and say the following: Ashrei Tivchar b'Zekarev Yishkin Chatzerach. Okay, so the Zohar says that early pious ones said this in the as a introduction, as an opening to the Briis Milah. So the Rebbe says, but we say it for everybody. Though in the Zohar it says that was the early Chasidim, the early pious ones that did it. In other words, very special people did this. The Alter Rebbe writes this in the Siddur, and the Rebbe always emphasizes that the Siddur, unlike other the types of Sfarim, it's equal for every person. In other words, the Alter Rebbe specifically wrote a Siddur, for example, that doesn't have a lot of Kavanas Arizal, even though it's based on the Arizal Siddur, because he wanted to make a Siddur that's applicable for everybody. So since the Alter Rebbe included it in the Siddur, this means this pasuk is not just like the Zohar says, Chasidim Kadmoim, but it's also applicable to everybody. So the Rebbe is going to go on to explain Ubir Hashaychas, the pasuk Zel, Briis Milah, the explanation of the connection between this pasuk and the Briis Milah is because of the following reason. And this, as he's going to sum up in a very short way over here in the first paragraph, but then he's going to elaborate. The pasuk Zeh Nimnim Dal in Yonah. This pasuk is enumerated 4 aspects. It says your courtyards. By the fact that it says your courtyards, that in the Yud, and it's with a Segal, so it's plural. So it means Shtei Bechinas Chotzer. There are 2 types of courtyards. And then Beischa ve'echolcha, your home and your chamber. This is 2 more levels. That's in singular. The Seder in Yom Pasuk Malmatalamayla, the order of the matters in the pasuk is from below to above. Like it's brought down over there in the Zohar. First, it is you go into the courtyards. The basar beisecha. Afterwards, they go into your home. Well, the basar echolcha. Afterwards, they go into your chamber. Da pnima midah. This one is more inner than the other. The and this one is higher than the other. In other words, it's all a progression going from outside, like a physical thing, just like outside. It's a courtyard, then you go into the house, then you go into inner chambers, the same thing. These represent those levels as well. We could say, these four levels, the two levels of Chatzar, the level of Beischa and Hechalcha corresponds to the four worlds of Abyakin L'Kaman Sivav, as we will elaborate in Ois Vav later on. That's the reason why we say this pasuk before a Briis. We know through the Milah we draw down Amshachas beyond Seder Ishtalshlos. That's why the Milah is done on the 8th day. The number 8 signifies that it transcends the regular cycle of Ishtalshlos, which is divided into the number of 7. So that there should be able to be this drawing down of higher than Seder Ishtalshlos. There has to first be the perfection of Seder Ishtalshlos of the four worlds of Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Asiyah, hinted in our pasuk of Chatzirecha, Beischa, and Echolcha, Kidl, like we will say later on, Siv Zayin. So now he's going to start elaborating by first understanding what exactly a Chatzar is, what the different types of Chatzar. The idea behind this is the difference between a courtyard and a house in the literal sense is the bayis hu diras adam. A house is a place where a person lives. What does a person usually use the courtyard for? That's where a person keeps animals, that's where a person keeps birds. Like it's brought down the Mishnah, a person that would place his animal in the courtyard, and would use the courtyard as a place of growing and having his birds over there. And actually, Tzemach Tzedek says, he brings in the footnotes, that chatzir is from the word chatzir. Chatzir is a type of animal food that animals eat. So that's why it's called chatzir. Chatzir is related to chatzir. Chatzir. Chatzir atzmir is tnei sugim. We said before, chatzirecha is plural. So there's two types of chatzir, two types of courtyards. Chatzir mekura v'chatzir she'einu mekura. A chatzar that has a roof over it, and a chatzar that is open to the sky. The difference between a roofed-in courtyard and a courtyard that doesn't have a roof also has a halachic difference concerning Shabbos. That when it comes to carrying on Shabbos, there's a difference if it has a roof or it doesn't have a roof. The chatzar she'einu mekura kishu yoyser misasayim, a chatzar without a roof, even though it's surrounded by walls, but if it's larger than the area of sasayim, whatever that big large area is, but it's a huge area, midaraisa rishus hayachid, min hatoida it's still a rishus hayachid. Why? Because it's surrounded by walls. It's an enclosed area. But avu midibri soifrim hu kekarmelis. Midrabanon, we consider it as a Carmelis, which is like a little bit of a neutral zone between Rishus Harabim and Rishus HaYachid. Lefisha doimel Rishus Harabim, because since it's such a big area and it doesn't have a roof, so the Chachamim consider it similar to Rishus Harabim, and we do not mainly do things in the Carmelis that we weren't be allowed to do in the Rishus HaRabim concerning carrying 4 cubits or bringing in from Rishus HaYachid into there, etc. The Chatzar Mekuram, on the other hand, in Halacha, a courtyard that has a roof over it, Rishus HaYachid gam midivrei soifrim. It's a Rishus HaYachid even midrabanan. In other words, even if it's such a large area of more than Sasayim, but it has a roof, even that is considered a Shusay Yachid. You're allowed to carry in it, you're allowed to bring from the house into it, and so on. And the difference between them is a very simple difference between a chotzer that has a roof versus a chotzer that doesn't have a roof. The shmiras habehemes igam b'chotzer she'ein mekur. If you need to guard and you need to make sure that your animals don't leave, so how do you contain them? You contain them by a fenced-in area, by a closed-in area with walls, even if it doesn't have a roof over it. But if you need to guard the birds, they could fly over the walls. Specifically in a roofed-in courtyard. So now he's going to explain the spiritual difference between what is an animal versus a bird, and the spiritual difference of what does it mean spiritually, a roofed courtyard or a non-roofed courtyard. So he says in the second paragraph on the second page, we could explain this according to what's brought down the Gemara. A behemoth that was created from the dry land, the way how it needs to be made kosher through slaughter is that the knife has to cut through both the windpipe and the food pipe. It cannot just cut one of them alone, because it comes from the ground. The animal says, it says the earth should give forth a living soul to animals. Oif, on the other hand, a bird and fowl, that was created from a mixture of water and earth, like the Rashi explains on the second day after that it was not just the earth, it was a mixture of the water and the earth. It is kosher even by cutting one of these signs. In other words, only one of the pipes, the food pipe, the windpipe, etc. The Maamar is explained in a different place. The behemoth of an animal that was created from the earth, Yabasha, the dry land. Dry land is like the earth. Earth is something solid. It shows on a strong item. Therefore, the vitality of an animal is considered something healthy and strong and powerful, and animals more powerful than a bird and fowl. It hints at the animal soul. That's the most strongest and coarsest state of the animal soul. Therefore, the way it is made kosher, the way it needs to be shechted, in other words, slaughtered to be able to be eaten, you need to cut through two of its signs, through two of its pipes, etc. In other words, it needs a stronger shchita to sublimate this strong nefesh abahamis. On the other hand, fowl that was created from mud, mayim for water and earth mixed together, roim is on nefesh abahamis k'meshibedakas, that indicates and hints on the animal soul, the way it's a more subtle type of animal soul, not such a heavy and coarse animal soul. Therefore, the way it's made kosher through slaughter is only with one. You don't need such a strong cutting through, because it's not such a hard and difficult nefesh abahamis. And even more specifically, it's not two levels in the nefesh abahamis, but rather behema hi nefesh abahamis atzma, an animal that is corresponding to the nefesh abahamis itself. It comes and derives from the lower levels of klippus noiga. In other words, it's coming from gasas shalah. It's coming from the coarse level of klippus noiga. The oifu nefesh is a bird, fowl, is the the intellectual soul. It comes from the higher levels of Klippus Noiga, the more subtle and finer levels of Klippus Noiga. And because it's from a higher level in Klippus Noiga itself, therefore the Nefesh HaSichlis, the intellectual soul, acts as an intermediary between the animal soul and the godly soul, because it's not as coarse as the animal, which comes from the lower levels of Klippus Noiga. On the other hand, it's not a lakus, so therefore it can act as an intermediary. And this is indicated and hinted at also in a physical bird. That's the idea that a bird flies in the air, at least from time to time. We could explain the flight of a bird in two ways. One thing is the very fact that it flies in the air, that a bird flies in the air, is because of the bird, which is referring to the Nefesh HaSichlis. The nature of the intellectual soul is to fly. What does that mean? The nature of the intellectual soul itself is to fly. Because the nature, the characteristic of intellect is Gam HaSeichel the Nefesh HaSichlis, even the intellect of the intellectual soul. Hagam Shu Seichel Tivi. Although it is natural intellect, it's not godly intellect. Seichel the Noiga, it's the intellect of Klippus Noiga. Mikol Mokim, despite the fact, Kiven Shu Seichel, since it is after all intellect. Tivayu, its nature is lias nimshach lamashal amaylo menu. The nature of intellect is to be drawn to something higher. It's always looking to discover. It's always trying to reach higher than what it has. It's trying to get new ideas, new information. It's trying to go high. So therefore, that's like a bird in flight. So that's one reason why the Nefesh HaSichlis, which is likened to a bird, has this power of flight, or it's similar to a bird that flies, because it's always reaching upward. Another way of explaining the flight of the bird, which is the idea of the Nefesh HaSichlis, another idea in this is through the enclothing of the godly soul in the intellectual soul. The Nefesh HaSichlis now can grasp and intellectually understand godly matters that are beyond the world. Therefore, it's taking flight. So in other words, the nature of the flight of the Nefesh HaSichlis in this explanation is not part of the characteristic of the Nefesh HaSichlis itself, but because of its interaction with the Nefesh HaLakis helps the Nefesh HaSichlis take flight. Even then, when it takes flight and it understands godly matters that are beyond the world, Hirak maskima lahasaga the Nefesh HaLakis. It's only that it agrees and accepts what the Nefesh HaLakis comprehends and understands, but it doesn't become truly transformed. But the Nefesh HaSichlis remains in a way of that it's still an intellectual understanding. It's still something that is the Nefesh HaSichlis. It's still something that is in the human realm. It's still not in the godly realm, and that's why it's still an animal. It doesn't cease being an animal, though a more refined animal. It's a bird, not a coarse physical animal. Okay, let's continue. The last paragraph on this page. Now he gets to the idea of, we said that the open air courtyard is a place where animals are guarded, and the covered courtyard is a place where you guard birds from flying away. So it's a very interesting thing. he's going to turn something around over here, and he's going to say that even though birds are more refined than animals, and that's why they only need shchita with one siman, etc., and they are the level of nefesh hasichlis from a higher level of klippus noiga. But just like birds need to be physical birds, need further guarding, more guarding by this roofed-in courtyard than an animal, they're more likely to escape. The same thing, the nefesh hasichlis, even though it is more refined than the nefesh bahamis itself, it needs more protection and more limitations placed on it to be able to make sure that you do not lose it, if you will. Let's see the way the Maamar explains it. Yesh loymar, we could say, the fact that guarding animals is also, you could do so in a not roofed-in courtyard. But guarding birds and fowl has to be specifically in a roofed-in courtyard. Though the birds are more subtle and more edel and more refined, to such a degree that you don't need a shechted 2 simon and 1 simon is enough. So seemingly it seems to be counterintuitive. If they are more refined and more edel, why do we need to have this extra protection on top? Kidak is the noigam einay niker kolkach, because this subtlety and this refinement of klippus noiga that's to be found in the nefesh hasichlis more than nefesh bahamis is not so recognizable. And therefore it needs extra protection. But it doesn't quite, this line doesn't quite yet explain why it needs more protection than an animal. It could only explain why they would both need the same type of protection, but why this extra protection? So he says, and to add, just like in the physical. Why in the physical sense are birds not able to be guarded in a not roofed-in courtyard? Because they could fly over the walls. What is the idea of taking flight? Taking flight, we said, is being able to comprehend and reach things beyond itself. So too, it's spiritually the fact that the intellectual soul needs additional guarding and additional protecting, because it has the characteristic, the nature of flying in the air, that necessitates a greater type of protection. Why is that so? The kivin shaseichel, the nefesh hasichlis nimshachol mashal ma'ilo menu, since the intellect of the intellectual soul is drawn to what is higher than it. V'yiseidim, not just as it drawn something higher than it. Shuhu masig al yidei slapshus nefesh halakis b'nefesh hasichlis inyan elokus shalom ma'ilo ma'ilo. Like we said, also another idea of why the nefesh hasichlis is called like a bird that flies, because through the nefesh halakis becoming enclosed in nefesh hasichlis, it can comprehend godly matters that are beyond the world. So it is really a very seemingly spiritual being. So he's saying no. That itself is its downfall. Therefore, to be able to find the bad, that's an intellect who is dafkai, his bondus is only through meditation. By appreciating and meditating about how godliness is completely above human intellect. When we feel we can box in godliness, yeah, I can get it, I get it, I understand it, that itself allows us to become more coarse, because it's relatable. If it's relatable, so I don't become so bottled before it. that in truth also those matters of godliness that are comprehended in human intellect, the intellect does not really comprehend them the way they are truly. In other words, we know that there's aspects of godliness that completely are beyond intellect. We're not even talking about that. That even intellect is willing to accept that it's beyond its comprehension. But those things that it comprehends, those things, intellect things, that I got it. So the truth is that intellect needs to be made aware that even those things that are supposed to be comprehended from godliness, he doesn't truly get it. Just to give a mashal, it's like Chassidus says, that it's not just that chukim are beyond our comprehension, but in truth, even mishpatim, even rational laws, even civil laws that make sense logically, are really higher than intellect, but Hashem enclosed them in intellect. It's a similar idea, not exactly the same thing you're saying here. How come do we say that even things that God, even aspects of godliness, that the intellect appreciates, or he doesn't appreciate them thoroughly and truly, kivin shem alakus, since these matters are godliness, even that which is comprehended, hareim beligvul, so therefore they do not have a boundary, they do not have a limitation. And the way the intellect comprehends these aspects of godliness, and we must say that the intellect, by grasping it, is limiting these things. Top of the page, it feels the wondrousness of godliness that's beyond intellect. Mikura begag. That's what it means. That's covered by a roof. Being covered by a roof means there's something above me. It's similar to what we explained about why do we put a yarmulke on our head. A yarmulke and a head covering indicates that a yid recognize that there's something on top of me. And as much as my brain is so important and vital, etc., there's something beyond my understanding. The same thing, an enclosed, a roofed-in courtyard indicates that even the nefesh sichlis should recognize that a likus is beyond intellect, and through that, the more subtle bad that's to be found in intellect becomes refined, and nishmeres, it is guarded, it cannot fly away and escape the enclosure.